The Humble Harvest and Eternal Voices. October 1862, Jefferson County, West Virginia. After a great battle,
but just as she passed the window, best seen by the sharpshooters, a gust of wind blew her skirts and a curtain aside. Shots immediately announced that the light had been seen.
I asked how the child had been killed. The reply given was, in substance, the same as the old man's. With both hands she slowly and solemnly raised the blood-stained cover off the little breast, saying in sobs as she did so, "Just look here."
Deeds of valor are no longer dreams gone by. We live in nightly days. Our men are dauntless men. Will there ever be one to write the life of the common soldier?
The regiment had not lost a man, to be sure, but had seen a genuine fight, heard the scream of the shells, and seen a caisson blown up and men knocked over. "Well, you are from the old sod, ain't you?" My reply was simply, "Yes, sir." Last night it rained for an hour or so. It put the ground in fine order for seeding. I sent the wagon to Mr. Moore in 27 bushels by measure. The day was fine for seeding. No military to be seen on our side of the hill.
Wednesday, October 15th. Pa is becoming rather tired of our South Carolina soldier. Thinks he is sufficiently well to leave.
And I enjoyed the ride the more for being fortunate enough, firing from my horseback with my revolver, to kill a gray squirrel, which, as our mess arrangements had been thrown into utter disorder by the events, was gladly welcomed the same evening on our dinner table. October 10th, Thursday. Weather rainy towards evening. Irish-born St. Clair Mulholland commanded the 116th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment when it pulled into Harpers Ferry on the train. The train carrying the regiment arrived at Sandy Hook near Harpers Ferry at daybreak, October 10th. The men woke up and tumbled out of the cars, sore, sleepy, and tired, and formed line. And as the sun came over the hills and slowly moved through Harpers Ferry and climbed up the steep incline to Bolivar Heights, a halt for breakfast on the crest, and the men lit their little fires on ground that was literally covered with fragments of Confederate shells, the whole ground being strewn with pieces of shells, round shot, and debris of the battle. While the boys were eating and looking around at the magnificent scenery, a very amusing, rather serious incident occurred. A regiment from Maine, a new regiment also, came up to join the 2nd Corps and halted to prepare breakfast, and finding plenty of 30-pound Parrott shells lying around, used them to build fireplaces, forming 4 or 5 of the oblong bolts in a ring with the points up, making an excellent resting place for the coffee pot. But when the fire in the center began to roar and crackle and the coffee to boil, the shells began to explode, much to the amazement of the boys from the Pine Tree State. Half a dozen of the cooks were wounded. The coffee spilled, the whole corps had a good laugh, and the men of Maine had learned something. At noon, the regiment fell in, marched over to the headquarters of the Irish Brigade, and reported for duty. The Adjutant General, Major O'Neill, assigned the command a spot on Bolivar Heights on a bluff overlooking the Shenandoah River on which to pitch camp. And the streets were soon measured off and tents erected. Towards evening, when the matters had gotten into something like order, Brigade Commander General Thomas Francis Maher came to make a visit out of courtesy to his new command. He came in state, splendidly mounted, and surrounded by a brilliant staff, the members of which seemed to wear a deal more gold lace than the regulations called for. Maher was a handsome man, stately and courteous, with a wonderful flow of language and poetic ideas. When the canteen had been passed around, the conversation became animated, and Maher displayed a most gracious manner that was captivating and charming to a remarkable degree, and forming a strange contrast to his mood at other times when he tried to be stern, and his manner was not so affable. A pleasant evening it was, and when the general and his gorgeous staff rode away in the darkness, he left a pleasing impression behind him. The camp at Harpers Ferry will always be remembered by the members of the regiment with pleasure. October 11th, Saturday. Weather cloudy and cool in the morning. Rain during the night. At Rock Hall Farm, Mary Ambler wrote in her diary that day,
Saturday, October 11th. The wagons were here again today, but Pa is tired out with selling and refused them anything but hay. They beg for that at any price.
October 12th, Sunday, weather cloudy in the morning. October 13th, Monday, weather cloudy during the day, rain during the night. Private William McCarter, controlling his stammer, was called to Commander Maher's tent. Early on the morning of the 13th, our colonel sent me a message to be ready to accompany him to the headquarters of General Maher at 10 a.m. I was a perfect stranger to him. Had I been guilty of any crime or misdemeanor worthy of reproof or punishment? I, however, rigged myself up in my dress uniform, brightened up all my buttons and brasses, and presented a pretty fair soldierly appearance. On entering the tent of General Maher, the usual salute passed between the two commanders and me. "General, here is your man." "Ah," said the general. "Be seated." With that pleasing smile on his countenance, which he always wore when addressing personally any of his soldiers, he asked, "Well, you are from the old sod, ain't you?" My reply was simply, "Yes, sir." Maher then put his hand into his coat breast pocket, and after seeming to not have found what he wanted, he called his orderly. "Do you know what became of the piece of poetry titled 'The Land of My Birth' with the name McCarter written on the back?" The orderly brought it from a writing desk nearby. Then, glancing at me, General Maher held it out, asking, "Is that your handwriting?" "Yes, sir," I replied. I also stated, "Yes, sir, that is my handwriting." McCarter wrote the poem in 1860 in Philadelphia, and later an officer at camp read the poem, and McCarter gave it to him as a gift. After some discussion with the other officer, Maher said, "He writes so well, I'm in much need of a clerk for the brigade. He could make himself more useful and be of more service in that capacity." And turning to me, he asked, "What say you yourself, McCarter?" "Fix it between yourselves, gentlemen," said I. "I am satisfied." "Thank you," responded General Maher. St. Clair Mulholland later put to paper his fond memories of those days at Bolivar and Harpers Ferry. The camp at Harpers Ferry will always be remembered by the members of the regiment with pleasure. The weeks spent there were full of enjoyment, plenty of drills and hard work to be sure, but still time enough for visiting through the camps and rambles through the old historic town. The ruins of the engine house where old John Brown made his last stand was a point of great interest to all. The magnificent scenery, the bright, sunshiny days, and the visit to the army of many ladies all lent a charm to a new life. That truly lovely woman, Mrs. General Thomas Francis Maher, spent a week or two in camp, and many other wives of officers took advantage of the peaceful days to visit the army. Then there was the frequent target practice down by the riverbank, where the boys fired away at imaginary Confederates and filled trees full of buck and ball, with an implied understanding that the trunks were Confederate generals.
One night, a lady visitor at our house attempted to carry a light to her bedroom, a necessary part of her toilette, being to put her hair in curl papers, and she enjoyed doing it before a mirror. She concealed her tallow candle, the only thing available at the time, behind her ample skirts and person. But just as she passed the window best seen by the sharpshooters, a gust of wind blew her skirts and curtain aside. Shots immediately announced that the light had been seen, and very soon after, a knock is heard on the door. It is a message from the commanding officer to the effect that signals to the rebels have been seen emanating from the house. The family are allowed 1 hour in which to quit the place, as the house will be shelled. The excitement is of course intense in the little circle. It is about 9 o'clock at night. The children are awakened out of their sleep. Into each little hand is put as large a package of clothes as it can handle. The farm wagon is brought out, and notwithstanding it is night, it is well flagged. It is quickly filled with beds and bedding, the only things it seems possible to take. The family is about to mount in upon the beds when the order is revoked, to the untold relief of the anxious father and mother. And the great disappointment of the children, who are keen for adventure.
Mulholland continues his reveries of his Harpers Ferry of October 1862, almost oblivious to adjacent pockets of deep suffering and travail. He wrote, "The quiet picket line 3 miles out towards Halltown, the evening campfire, reviews, martial music, and all the pomp and display of war rendered the days pleasing indeed." The 1st Division, 2nd Corps, of which the regiment had now become, was known as Hancock's Division. The Irish Brigade consisted of the 69th and 88th and 63rd New York and 29th Massachusetts regiments. The 3 former were Irish regiments. The latter, like ours, the 116th, was composed principally of Americans and had been placed in the brigade temporarily. The men quickly fraternized with the old regiments and soon were fast friends. There was very little sickness in the command and not one death during the time it was camped at Bolivar Heights. But in many other Pennsylvania regiments camped nearby, there was a great deal of fever and many funerals. It seemed strange that the men of the regiment, chiefly from the city, from the factory and workshop, should stand the exposure of the camp better than the men who came from the country. At Harpers Ferry, the command improved rapidly in every duty of the soldier. The picket line near Halltown ran through a delightful country. Firewood and food were plentiful, and picket duty was a pleasure rather than a pain. At one point, the line ran between two farmhouses in which resided lovers. The boy within the Union line and his lady love over the border. Neither were permitted to communicate, but they would come as close to the picket as allowable and look sweet at each other. Happy was the officer of the day who could eat breakfast with a lover, and then cross the line and dine in the house of the beloved. He was sure to fare well in return for any brief message that he might carry.